Grüezi ragazzi, bienvenue und willkommen to Cannabis Scientia LinkedIn Live Sessions. Today we have Viola is back again, the founder of Cannabis Scientia, and she's going to talk to us about something again very interesting. I'm biased. I think everything is pretty interesting in this course. That's why I'm here, and she's going to talk about the science of gratitude. Gratitude is a bit of a heavy word. I know it's a loaded word. For example, for my sister, she said she finds it puts a lot of pressure on her when she thinks about having to be thankful for things. So I'm curious to learn more about it. And without further ado, let's dive right into it.
Thank you, Christina. I know today it might be, I think I'm gonna borrow one of the previous guest speaker that we had with Barbara, saying that it might touch on some cheesiness today. So get prepared. It might be a bit cheesy,
Let me get some
but
wine for my cheese.
exactly. Also, if anyone is familiar with the cheese reaction on too much serotonin in the brain, well, Maui and all of that stuff. Like, no, it's just playing on words.
Mhm.
But ideally, yes, I think it's a topic that obviously does. We hear it in different type of environments, whether that's like our community or um, churches, if anyone goes there, or just in school and even family conversation, and very often I think we pick up on, hey, you should be more grateful about this, and but what does really entice, and does it have any changes, like what are the changes and what does it constitute for our physiology, this sense of gratitude? And so I wanted to explore a little bit of that in terms of our physiology, and then seeing its application not just in us. Obviously, we're not a separate being from the rest of our environment. So how does this potentially have a strong impact on our surroundings and applications, even with I put in there, like, I know some people here, since it's cannabis scientia, are following whether for a conversation that comes from the understanding and interest into the endocannabinoid system, and that's one group. Hello. And then another group might be here around because they have a love for the plant. Maybe both of them are obvious as well. And so I also wanted to touch slightly, at least like give some coordinates on how this can have an impact even on, let's say, an economic aspect of our lives, in terms of can we better our crops, like our yields are going to be better, our so really our surroundings, in terms of can we make the places that we live into and the type of occupation that we have better, or is just our perception because we're kind of like in the drug of gratitude. So obviously, everything we do in our life, it's our perception. So I guess we could also close this presentation by saying this and then all go home. But I, for the ones that just like me have a little bit of curiosity on what have other people that are scientists or not necessarily scientists, but that have used the tool of science to investigate. And investigation, most of the times, it's a great way to involve other people in seeing the mechanisms, and so get involved into the process itself. It doesn't necessarily, the more I'm being a scientist, I guess, the more I'm understanding that the role of science is not even that of providing answers, it's more that of helping us, like creating good questions. So this is my attempt for today. And I'll start right in by showing the picture of these men, Masaru Emoto. Probably I'm pronouncing it wrong. He passed away not too many years ago, but he was a Japanese I mean, in the later part of his life, we met him as a doctor, scientist, but mainly he was a businessman, really. So, and I think for anyone that also went into calling him out as a pseudoscientist, truly he was a pseudoscientist. He wasn't a scientist. That wasn't his background. So, and he wasn't even trying to fake it. But he just observed um, how water has been changing from our own thoughts. And so his hypothesis and his question that really give us is whether our thoughts can change the water. Then what is the role of those different thoughts doing back to us? And why are we even saying this? I want to just dive straight into his experiments, because I think it's like pretty visible what he was saying and doing. So this man, throughout the 90s, and then he started to publish at the end of the 90s, observes how if he treats samples of water, of the same identical water, and treats them with different type of words, and so therefore different type of vibration, because as we know, as I'm talking now, I'm emitting sound, which is just waves, right? Then there was a different reflection on the water crystals that he would obtain from it. So the experiments were really, really easy. He would take jars of same batches of water, and then he would apply different type of treatments. So for example, to the one that I put up here on the right hand, we have like a crystallized version of water with thank you being told to it. Thank you. And he used also this interesting, because I was wondering whether different languages as well would influence it. And so he also apparently wondered about that. So there are different crystals that are equally beautiful and aesthetics, using thank you in English, but also arigato. I would say that probably the arigato ones were even nicer from my point of view. Like they look extremely complete. And what is a nice looking and a bad looking water crystal? I mean, we are raised by being told that beauty is absolutely subjective, and at least this is how Italian mother grows up. I don't know whether that's a common experience, but usually that's what we're told. And so what is objective beauty? Usually it's proportional, what in our eyes look like something with good proportions in between, and something that has a good symmetry. Yes. uh, and so indeed, if you look at the crystals or the crystallized water samples with not even as heavy as I will kill you, but simply going to water samples and kind of deprecating them with you fool, you fool, you fool daily, the crystals kind of look really asymmetric, and they don't have those like typical perfect snowflake picture that we like to represent in books, right? And again, he applied different type of music. This is not to say that heavy metal was bad or that Mozart was good, but I guess in a sense he was using like very coherent music and very incoherent and like more, let's say, chaotic music and more chaotic type of vibration. And so it starts to reflect on how water might really be a sort of mirror of our consciousness, a mirror not just to the physical world. And you're like, in what sense? Like, think of a pond, right? The famous epic story of Narciso. We all hear about talking about narcissist, but Narciso was just reflecting his image in the pond, because there weren't mirrors at that time, and so the best way to have a mirror was going to a pond and look at yourself, to look at your shape. And he was so mesmerized by his own beauty that he fell into the pond. Correct? That's the story of Narciso. And so what Masaru Emoto proposes is that the water is more than reflecting our physical world, and it might probably reflect also the consciousness of our mind. So just as the moon shines even brighter when it shines into the sea, into the ocean. I used to live just in front of the sea, and the beauty of those full moons was not just watching the full moon reflecting in the water, but the fact that the water would kind of lead the rays all the way to me, right, to the observer. His theory then becomes, what if our consciousness, so saying, hey, I love you, water, or you fool, could have an impact in the water? And why is this somehow relevant, and why are we even talking about this, and why it's interesting and important? Well, because especially when we are very small kids, when we are in the neonatal phase, we are mainly composed of water. Depending on which part of our body, we have different kind of composition on our like body part ratio, matter versus water. Water is also matter, so sorry, rewind that. But when I say approximately, here I'm writing the human body is made of approximately 70% of water. What I mean is something like your brain, it's actually a higher percentage of that. Whilst there are your lungs, it's a higher percentage of that. And then you have like your bone structure, a lower percentage of that. But as an approximation, as an average, we are made, this I think universally, we hear it all the time, that we're made of water. So what impact can we generate if water, as we see externally, has this important shift based on our words or the music or the sounds that we provide? What shift does this can have in our own like bodily water, and that of the people that, or the animals or the plants that are surrounding us, that are also composed on a good percentage by water? And so really this is the basis of his theory on how water inside of us may at this point resonate with emotional and vibrational input, and so how thoughts and words and intention can affect us both physically but also emotionally, and how this kind of loops in. Just another thing I wanted to bring, like another sort of evidence I wanted to focus on. Here, when you write, you can't see my cursor, but Fujiwara before prayer and Fujiwara after prayer. This is again from another set of experiment that he set up. And once he started to publish those results, he picked up quite a lot of fame. And fame, it just like a lot of people started to be really interested about this phenomenon. And so he gathered in Japan like a pretty large group, I think around 500 people. In his area, there was I don't remember if it was a lake or a river. I'm sorry, I prepared this presentation and then I forgot. I think it was, sorry. I don't remember. I need to double check back again, but it was water that was basically used to be very clean. And then over the years, because of like industry nearby, it started to get like really, really polluted. So the people in that area were complaining because there was like bad smell, and it was just like unbearable to be there anymore. Like no one was going there anymore having a picnic. It was just horrible stench of water. And so they decide to gather around that water and all together to do a prayer to this water and to, collectively thank that water for the sustenance, thank that water for how it managed to clean out for years and years, like that area, how it was used to support like the nearby industry, and then they just like blessed the water. Basically, they stay there and they thanked and blessed the water, and they took samples of this water before the prayer, and you can see it here in this very incoherent sample. And then after the prayer, it was also crystallized one of these sample, and it's from exactly the same pond or river. And I'm really sorry that I don't remember whether it was like more stagnant or if it was a moving water. I know this is kind of an important detail, but I'll make sure to probably follow up this presentation and type it down as a comment. So a few days later, this experiment was went on. There was also an article. This wasn't peer-reviewed, published, but there was an article on a local newspaper that was actually talking on how it mysteriously that year there was no bad smell out of that area. That area was kind of like cleansed from all of the pollution that usually they were used to have from that space. So all the people that participated in this experiment, they were pretty sure that they contributed to that with their prayer. I just leave it to you, as information, like as the title of this slide in particular, it's really how it's been called throughout, and one of the reasons we haven't studied this in science school, because this is all called like pseudoscience, and it really was his early work. But then its pseudoscience was brought further to see whether we can use validated scientific methods to apply to his theory and see whether there was like a basis of this. And so this is a double-blind test that was run on this exactly same concept from Masaru Emoto. In this case, basically, a group of, at this point, was like 2,000 people around Masaru Emoto, so again, in Japan. They were shown images of water samples that were stored in a place in California where this study actually was run, which were shielded electromagnetically. So they wanted to make sure that the only, let's say, electromagnetic vibration that were arriving potentially were those very far away intentions in terms of like localization coming from Tokyo. What the group in Tokyo didn't know was that also it was prepared like a very similar, like from exactly the same batch of water, samples of water that were also like stored again in a shielded place electromagnetically, but were not shown to them. So they were only aware, like these 2,000 meditators were only aware of, let's say, sample A to M, and then N to Z were not even like being told that they were part of the experiment. So that's how they, started the blinding and having the controls for this experiment. And then at the end of the moment of intention and sending intentions and saying thank you and saying that the water was beautiful. 100, I think 100, right? Yes, 100 independent judges were asked to rate. So the water crystals were put under the microscopes, and then they were asked to rate kind of like a description of how the water crystals were looking like. And I did put, again, some images here for just context, because I think it's interesting. Some details that came out throughout this type of experiment was not only like what was said, so in this case was like you're beautiful, but it was also a fact that was said numerous times. So like there was a repetition around that, because we already see a difference between the first sample where you're beautiful, it's said, let's say once a week, and then we have you're beautiful like 5 times a day. and then we have a disregarded one. So a disregarded one would really be like the samples that, as we said, were still part of this experiment but were not said and shown how like that there wasn't any intention towards them. And they were also crystallized, and as you can tell, they're kind of like the most distorted type of crystals that they're formed. So disregard, it's also a component. So we now have different components. We have, as I said before, negative input like hate, anger, and chaotic sounds that go and create distorted and fragmented crystals. We have positive input like love and gratitude and harmonious music that lead us to something beautiful and symmetrical crystals. But then we also have different variables. And in these variables as well, it's like how frequently we access this and whether we just completely disregard it. And I think it's interesting also to look at the disregard part of it, because sometimes I think in this time and age, especially, we kind of like save ourselves by saying, hey, but I didn't say anything bad. No, but also not engaging into leaving a place or a person in a better space that they were energetically. It's kind of having an effect that as well, like not doing anything. It's not like being neutral. There is no neutrality. Basically, there is not neutrality. Not speaking up or not saying, and it's part of an equation where we are actively doing something, which is disregarding. And this has been, I think, brilliantly shown in the experiments that were carried out then on different type of cereals. So here I show the rice one, but then they were also run, at that point, they were run from different groups, because then at that point it became science. I mean, I'm sorry, the title of this that I put was really like, this consciousness of water, we can still call it completely pseudoscience, but I mean, to me, I learned that when P is equal 0.001, what that is saying in science is this is what we consider pretty fucking good science. Like, we're pretty lucky because that's the probability that that event happened randomly. So the probability is pretty low. Now, obviously, for the way we explain science, there is never certainty. And that's the beauty of science, that we always leave an openness to different possibilities and to being implemented, because it's a moving thing where the next person is gonna sit on our shoulders and is gonna see even farther and is gonna clarify even more, and so we understand more. But usually that's when we get those results in science, we're pretty happy as scientists. So And at that point, different groups started to experiment on different type of cereals, because it's an easy way as well to check whether water changes and what does these changes emit in terms of like the biology of what it enters in contact with. And so we have the thank you rice, we have the disregarded rice, and we have the you full rice. And of course, at first, it's immediately we can see, even if it's black and white. I'm sorry, I didn't find like a color version of this, but I think it's pretty evident on how the you full one, it's clearly like the rotten rice. Okay, that's pretty evident. And then the healthy one, it's the thank you one. But the disregard one, it's the fastest one out of the three to start the rotting process. So somehow, and I think this is very interesting, when we disregard something, in this case water, and the water that was inside those cereals, this rice, we are even fastening the process than kind of insulting that rice. And I think this is really about even if I'm insulting you, Christina, in that moment, I'm placing energy in you. And so I am considering you. Thank you for appearing. So it's less, it's like less like a crazy person. So I'm putting energy in you, and I think in that way it's kind of like still considering your existence, and it's still acknowledging your existence. Was in these disregarding studies, I was really fascinated on how they were like absolutely like statistically significant, how it was like the fastest rotting. Then it wasn't like the group that was rotting the most, but it was the first one to start to decay. And so just, I mean, food for thought. This is all food for thought type of conversation. And so, as I was saying, why does this matter? Um, I took to obviously here again. There is quite a ton of like studies that we could cite. On one end, still remaining on the rice continuum, we have the field study on enhancement effect on lettuce seed. And in this case, basically, it was conducted a study where a healer was called by the owner of a field of lettuce, of a industry of lettuce, and it was checked different type of points. Sorry, let me go through. Yes, germination, growth, and general better health of the lettuce seeds. And so how they set up the experiment was they divided like the group, the cohorts of salad seeds into again a double-blind design with 4 treatment conditions. So you have on one side a group that it's healed by the healer, and so the healer is executing like some action on this jar or on some rituals where he's sending like healing intentions, and then you have another cohort where let's say a random person, like a person that is not necessarily knowing, it is not necessarily bringing in the intention, the same intentions in the ritual. So it's just mimicking what the healer is doing in terms of the ritual. Again, found really, really interesting, because sometimes we're like, shall I just go through the motions? Apparently, it's not as that effective. And then they had the untreated type of lettuce seeds. And the only group, the only cohort that really showed, I think it was a 10%. Yes, it's a 10% increase in the yield of that crop. So that's pretty significant, especially if you have a large crop. Um, was the jar that was treated by the healer. So this was at the basis of, let's say, I'm I'm a farmer. I have my agriculture establishment, and I have to budget for the year, and I have to decide whether I'm gonna spend in fertilizer. In I don't know. I'm not a farmer, but you got the point. Like, I understand budgets and how we distribute budgets, and in that case, it was really evident how actually investing in the healer was really making sense on the point of view of like then getting a much better result in terms of the yield. So I guess this you can apply, and I know quite if I have friends that are really interested on how, again, music and different type of music changes their cannabis plants and how they're growing them, and everyone start to have their own theories. And I just wanted to provide like some kind of like double blind, well, this is not placebo control, but it's like run with controls. The placebo, in the sense, it's the one mimicking the actions. Um, how it really can, it does have a pretty solid base, and we're seeing it from more and more sources, how these really have a solid like continuum between us and the plant. And I think any of us who has in their life people that are really good with plants, they know that these people are not just going through the motion of every X amount of days, I will give it water, I will give it that nutrient, it's missing these and is missing that, and then that's the perfect recipe, and boom, like you have the perfect plant. It's going to be a good plant, but it's not going to have that something more. It's not going to have that something more that we all have witnessed with the people that love plants. Again, the same I think can be told about a good chef, a good like you know being in a kitchen with the intention of like pouring love into what we're cooking, and when we're cooking out of stress, perhaps the same type of recipe, why does someday come out like really delicious and other days it just comes out like fine. And again, we're eating water. Like, I mean, we are eating water. Yes, we are eating like stuff that mainly is composed of water. Again, like water molecules are everywhere in the in our environment. And on the other hand, and this is more like my area of expertise, so I'm gonna be less scrambly, I think, in the explanation of this. It's how can we use this information in terms of healing ourselves, but not only ourselves, also the people that surround us. And so this is a very interesting study, from my point of view, in which compassionate intention was observed as a therapeutic intervention for cancer patients and their partners. And it was tested whether there was any effect actually in between the uh, intention of sending healing energies and in whether there was any effect in the recipient patient in their autonomic nervous system. And so again, this was a double-blind study, just exploring these potential hypotheses, not only on what does it happen whether when once observe this, but also what does it happen if we um, have motivated and trained, like if those people doing this type of exercise and this type of practice are aware that this is working, are aware that this makes sense, are trained into doing it, which is kind of, I guess, a good correspondence of the healer versus the normal person, let's say, mimicking the action. So it's also arriving there with that certainty, with that consciousness of, I know that if I do this, I will help my partner fight this cancer. Like that's a very empowering thought to have. And if we're told that that's so, and we go into this practice with that kind of um, intention and knowledge, it's even more powerful than simply doing the practice. And so again, I attach here the conclusion of the study that was showing that directing intention towards a distant person is correlated with activation of that person autonomic nervous system. So like this work on a subconscious level. We think we don't have an effect on everything that we kind of don't need to control, so everything that is the autonomic nervous system, but we, through our subconscious, actually, and can control. So through our consciousness, we can govern then our subconscious, or let's say unconscious rhythms that are playing into, for example, how many our heart rate and our digestive system, and whether our stem cells are going to replicate, and whether our cells are going to go into apoptosis correctly, or are they going to go into necrosis. Like all of this stuff are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So what is saying here is really good news. All the stuff that you thought you had zero control on, not only you have control on, but actually even the people that love you can help you get control on it. And so I felt like this is really the scope a bit of today's conversation on this. It's really looking at the application as well of these practices, and why they could make sense into making better our health and the health of, as I said, our environment, or our plants and animals that surround us. And again, I'm going a bit overboard, so I don't want to make it too long for today. But again, talking about pseudoscience, I wanted to cite actually a peer-reviewed paper from 2015, where Luc Montagnier, which it's a Nobel Prize for medicine, so it's really hard to call him pseudoscience, but institutions have tried their best to make him look like someone with cognitive decline, basically just because he started to endorse this type of science. So on one hand, he was, let's say, lucky enough to have previous work that gained him the Nobel Prize. So he was a Nobel laureate when he started to engage with this type of work. And he himself said that that was, fortunate enough, because already, like, even him arriving with that fame and that sort of strong endorsement still got him to work in the university at the interim, which we've cited a lot of time when we talk about, for example, mitochondrial cannabinoid receptors, you may remember. Thanks to the power of water to recharge. But he was literally put into a caravan. So not even inside like the university lab. I think that's pretty like evident on how scary mainstream science finds this type of conversation that lead us outside a Galenic point of view of everything that is matter, it's what we can access scientifically, and anything that is not necessarily matter, then it is not part of our observation as biologists or as medical doctors. But I think the issue and the beauty of the time and age that we are in is that thanks to physicists, actually, we can now understand much better biology and medicine. So the main issue is that we all specialize so much, so that usually a biologist or a medical doctor does not really have the deep understanding of their field and then also of physics enough to kind of put the pieces together. So in this study, that's exactly what has been done. He got in touch with the University of, it's south of Italy, I think was Benevento, was a life science university. I'm sorry, but I don't think it's fundamental. But anyway, the department was Department of Life Science and Physics. So then his collaborators were at that point a biologist and a physic. Yeah, he is a physician, like he's a medical doctor, and on the other hand, he had physics. And really, this is super beautiful. It's a lot of food for thought, and I also invite you, if you have like a spare hour of your time, to watch a documentary that is brilliant. It's like the documentary about this study, and so it's so. If I don't manage to make it clear through the slides, the next couple of slides that I'm going to present, watch this documentary, because it will make it like Netflix clear, like to everyone. But this is the basis on explanation of this phenomenon, and also potential explanation for anyone just like me who is also fascinated on, all this cool stuff like, hey, can we teletransport ourselves, and what are all the cool things that a Ubermensch can do? But guess that's really, really philosophical, so I will keep it for my own personal conversation for tonight's dinner. Just as a sort of like refreshment to make it like digestible for everyone. I know there is an audience that is quite general, like we're not all necessarily scientists. And so just to give you an idea on the basis of this experiment, PCR is the main component that is used here. Again, PCR, polymerase chain reaction. After COVID, we all think of PCR as something completely different from what PCR really is. Like a diagnostic analysis tool, but really that's not what was discovered for, thanks to, again, another brilliant scientist, Kerry Mullis. But really, it's think of it like processor of like a photocopying machine. Yeah, it's like a big photocopying machine. I think that's a good way of thinking of it. And so in this first, like the dark blue slide I put you in there, it's like if you have a sample and you have a sample with a single molecule of like a strain of DNA, then you can amplify like billions of time very quickly that sample of that molecule of DNA simply by inserting polymerase chain reaction. And so that's how you amplify, and that's exactly like the logic of how we run like a crazy number of experiments. That's why PCR got the Nobel Prize to Kerry Mullis, because again, it was like an incredible revolution for anyone working in biological field, because it allows us to do so many different type of experiments. On the other hand, if you have a sample that is containing water, but that there is no genetic material in it, you can insert as much PCR as you want, but the next nearby sample is not going to have amplified DNA. Okay, so I know it sounds like really basic, but we're going in steps, because then afterwards it's like, PCR made it. No, PCR is just replicating something that is on the other side. So if you don't have it on the other side, it's like it's not coming from nowhere. Okay. So that was to give like a little bit of background. And so what is the experiment of Montagnier and colleagues? What they start to look at, it's if I take a sample of water and I have known DNA fragments. So I have like all the write out like story of each of these genetic materials. And then I hyper diluted. I worked, I pipette out, like I do some good pipetting work, and I really dilute 10 to the power 6. That's a pretty good dilution of that DNA fragment. Then they are starting to record the electromagnetic signals that is emitted by that hyper diluted DNA solution. Let's say, I have the DNA Viola, then I diluted 10 to the power 6, and then in this other sample, I have my Viola DNA that is emitting this as electromagnetic signal, and that is somehow going to correspond to identifying me as that strand of DNA, that strand of the chapter of life, that set of information, that set of genetic information. Because what they notice is if they simply place nearby a sample of water that is not containing genetic material, but to the original sample that is emitting the Viola energy, electromagnetic signal, then the nearby sample is going to emit as well a very similar, if not identical, magnetic signal that identifies Viola. Sorry, I'm using myself as the very center of attention, but it's going to emit that frequency that identifies that genetic material. And if to that emitting samples of water, so that gives us an electromagnetic signals, we add PCR mixture, then what it results is that I get DNA that are the same as the original one, and they are amplified just as if materially. And that's why I wanted to show you like this first idea on how PCR works, because it's like I'm obtaining the same result just with the electromagnetic signal plus the PCR than if there was a strand of DNA, which it is not even part there. That there is where we only have the water emitting that electromagnetic signal that is identifying my name. Now, it's not even finished. The experiment is like goes even farther, and it's incredibly cool. And that's why I think it's really worth it to have like this little back on, like, does it have any science, like this thing on gratitude and thoughts and intentions and all of this stuff and how it changes the water. Because then the beauty of this is that, okay, that they identify the strand, and I already spoiled it for you. I told you that it's Viola, like in this case was whatever sequence that was, if we say that sequence was ATAGATACCG, and it was exactly complementary. Okay. Now the beauty of this experiment is really step 5, because it's just incredible. What has been done was that Montagnier thinks, okay, so if this has any basis of logic that is functioning on, so can we, from our laboratory, take the information of the DNA, record its electromagnetic signal, just simply record it, like we're doing now, basically. And then we send an email, like if you watch the documentary, it's so funny. Like they send, like all of these sector, they send an email with an attach to this laboratory in Italy. And so the colleagues open up the email, they have the file, and what they do is that they take another sample of water. The reason you see those samples of water with all of the like wires like all wrapped around, it's basically because they are containing them and shielding them from different signals, because as you know, we are all in a big electromagnetic field, right? So they're shielding them. Both of them are shielded. So this is emitting its own sound, its own music, the viola music. Then the viola music is sent over to the other lab, and then the other lab, it's kind of giving this symphony to a shielded sample of water that is only containing water, and then PCR mixture. And ta-da! So the beauty of this is that in the Italian lab, the same sequence of the DNA as the original one was recovered, and that this experiment was also carried out in human cultured cells. And so water that was emitting the electromagnetic signals that was originated from a certain DNA strand, again, is put into a medium, and then the same DNA was synthesized into human cultured cells a few days later. But in this case, the beauty of this is that they didn't even have to add to this reaction PCR, because the cell was doing that process. That's how we discovered PCR, because that's a process that we do endogenously. So this is kind of like one of the big bases of how life works. And it's extremely fascinating and sound almost magical in the sense. But it's a very simple science, very simple in the sense that, few steps, like there was no crazy, we all in labs have used way more complicated setups, and I think we got way less interesting revolutionary results. And this is pretty big, actually. So I wanted to just like brush on these on today's conversation, and then I'm just gonna start to go into the closing with some facts again that we all kind of have heard and are more familiar with, which is like, again, what the generation of the intention of gratitude, the intention of feeling thankful towards someone, something, basically it's like what, and again, I'm touching a lot here, but I could touch pretty much any part, any cell of my body, because it's, as I just explained, a whole body and beyond our body type of experience. And I think we are mainly familiar on how that's improving our mood and somehow, leveling up our serotonin levels and our discharge of oxytocin. So all of this like really feel good and feel love type of neurotransmission. And so that it's not like I wanted to give it for granted, but for the sakes of like staying 1 hour together, I think again I wanted to bring it back to something very pragmatic. Is, can this help me heal from certain pathologies somehow? And again, there is quite substantial science that lead us to, and generally the understanding that the more we can regulate like there is a neuroimmune regulation that obviously involves not only the activation of our parasympathetic nervous system, but in general, really the activation of how much we coherently allow our cells to emit signals of or tune into an electromagnetic signals of thank you. And is on the right, I am showing a paper from 95 Journal of Medicine, Physiological and Psychological Effects of Compassion and Anger. Participants in this case were asked to self-generate feelings, whether in one group of compassion and the other group of anger. And what was the focus there in terms of marker, and that's why I wanted to show in parallel these two studies, one done in 95, one done in 2015. The first one in 95, I think, was a much smaller sample of population, but the second one, it's with 120 participants, so it was a more statistically significant in terms of like numbers of sample. And in both cases, it was accounted for salivary immunoglobulin A, which it's a great marker to basically understand how good our immune system is working, and the results are pretty identical. In anger, it did suppress immune function, not only for the moment that those participants were at the end, were producing the anger response, but also like for a few hours later. And reversibly, the participants that were asked to engage into compassionate feelings not only had an increase in their salivary immunoglobulin A during the event, but also that lasted quite a few hours later. So pretty much these neuroscientists that now became pretty famous as very large gatherings of meditators, it's called Dr. Dispenza, asked his groups of meditators to simply getting measured in terms of like providing samples, bodily fluid samples of their saliva for a protocol that is very simple. They were simply asked to stay in a space of compassion and gratitude for 10 minutes a day, 3 times, so 30 minutes basically divided into 3 times a day for 4 days in a row. And these two variables were inversely correlated. So we had glucocorticoids like cortisol, were really the like king stress hormone that we all know that we tend to have a huge increase during sympathetic nervous system activation. So useful hormone if we need to fight or flight, but a very detrimental one if we have it on a consistent, our bodies, like most of our bodies actually in today's stressed, chronically stressed type of population have, pumping out. And so the more they engage in this type of activity, the less cortisol was released. And when we talk about less 3 standard deviation, for anyone who's not particularly familiar with the statistics, what that means is a lot, like a lot, 3 standards deviation, it's a lot. Like very, very improbable that was a chance or that is a slight improvement. That's like ridiculous amount. And on the other end, we have correlated with that the same exact result of salivary immunoglobulin A that went very, very down. Sorry, that again, went up as cortisol went down. And so what one of the big conversation that this Dr. Dispenza has is that, he likes to treat his patients without pharmaceutical intervention, because he can show with this type of experiment how we can measure what de facto are epigenetic changes that are supporting self-regulating healing. And you may be asking, how can we define this as an epigenetic change? It is because, again, epigenesis, it's something that imposes epi upon genes. So despite, we might have the same predisposition to create, cortisol or immunoglobulin A, depending on what we are feeding on our cells, we are going to be asking the production and therefore the translation of our genes differently. And that's how then it literally, that information will be replicated. And that's how you generate more lasting changes that are not just of that moment, but then could tune us in and fine tuning us into being people that wake up and have lower cortisol levels, because our cells have tuned in down cortisol thanks to this type of simple practices. So I know how usually we end up our practices with like a pragmatic part of it. Today, this is my pragmatic part of it. It's thanking you. It's thanking you for being here. It's thanking Christina to be here. It's acknowledging, my part and your part in this, I think, interactive thankfulness that we came into in this last hour, and perhaps again a little opening in our new knowledge. Perhaps you have code today that can help you or your surroundings to just be better, to feel better, to yes. So this is, I think, the shortest practice that we can have today is just really thanking you. And as a last thank you, I would love to thank anyone that be so nice, because I'm receiving personal messages and emails about thanking me for this one, for the principle of clinical cannabinology. And I love you. Thank you so much for letting me know. But I would be so thankful if any of you could leave one of these like thankful messages actually as a review, because I realized that there are no reviews. So I'll just put it out there. That's my thankfulness exchange for today. And yeah, that's about it.
Very, very cool presentation. And like a proper nerd, be proud of me. I took tons of notes.
Oh
And
my
I have
God.
questions for you, Viola. I have questions. I think something that stuck with me as that if we could summarize it in one sentence, today's session, and it even addresses that comment of pseudoscience. Like, okay, people, you think it's pseudoscience, fine. But let me tell you something that those people will believe in. They do believe in money, right? So investing in the healer makes sound financial sense. Like there's no disputing that, right? So for all the naysayers, that's something that they can't dispute. And then also, I think that we're all from different parts of the world, like at least the two of us. Right now, I'm in North America. I'm originally from Romania. We're all different parts of the world. And while we do speak a common language, we all have different understandings of each word. So I would like to talk a bit more about what gratitude is. Let me just start off with a cool definition that I found, and I said, okay, this is spot on. So it says gratitude is the quality of being thankful, but readiness to show appreciation for and to return kindness. What do you think of that definition? Does that apply, or how is it different from what is in your head?
I guess it's something, first of all, that I don't have necessarily in my head. I have it. I would store it somewhat differently, but I guess it's entering a space with the capacity to be only focused into the giving, and to get my accomplishment, my fulfillment, but rather than accomplishment, out of the giving. That I don't know whether that's making any sense, because I mean, I've been blabbing for the past hour at this point,
It's
but
yes, it's exactly what this said. Show appreciation and return kindness. So you're focusing on that person receiving something good, and that's what you get back out of it.
yeah,
And so I've been doing the dispensa meditations, and I have been focusing on generating gratitude, just because, like if you're dysregulated for a really long time, it is actually common that you're not as good at generating a specific feeling. And this came up in discussions with friends who are therapists, and they were saying that, like if you're depressed, you might have actually a hard time generating that feeling of happiness within you. So that's why you need to practice. And I can say that, the first time I generated gratitude, I was like, oh my God, this is so stupid. This is not going to work ever. And then I did it a few times. And then what I found is that throughout the day, when I encountered situations that, should make me grateful, but I hadn't felt before, I was able to feel that gratitude. So, like seeing my cat drink water, all of a sudden, I think it's a little bit more cute, like in that glass bowl of water, and you see the little tongue going, and I'm just like, oh, that gives me shivers, I'm so, gratitude. So I did personally experience a shift in that, which I am grateful for. But yes, it does take practice for sure. And then
yeah, and on this note, it's so true, and I think that's why we somehow use, because the whole thing of the water as well, it's a mirror. And so that's how now you were saying, like, feeling gratitude towards like someone or something. It's like we place it outside of ourselves, but that's a good stratagem. Like, that's a great tool to help us, like generating something that actually it's all within. It's like it's, despite the direction we might use the intention like on a inward to outward, but it's all in. So it's in my opinion, it's ways that we use to visualize better where we are directing, and so we can kind of tap in faster and better and access better the feelings of love when we think of someone that we love. But that person has even nothing to do with our equation. Like, it's ourselves that we are capable of loving or not. So yeah, at least that's my type of perception around like our creation of this type of energies, or any type of energy.
And just one last thing for everybody that loves numbers. I looked it up. So, like whenever, as a scientist, whenever somebody does a study or whatever, you always ask, okay, but what's your p-value? Like, that's what it comes down to. So when you mentioned it, so a p-value of 0.05 is kind of the limit. And what that means is 95% confidence that it didn't occur just randomly. And so P 0.01, that's 99%. But the P that you showed us in that study was 0.001. So that's 99.9%. So just wanted to highlight that, because sometimes these numbers, for scientists, they're like, oh my God, yeah, that's it. But if you're not like deep in science, you can easily miss that. So, like that kind of is enough for me to remove the label of pseudoscience. But I do understand. I would like to call that label an artifact of our humanity, of our own limitations.
Yeah. I got I mean, I guess we also being people in a group that has been, taking out the science on endocannabinoid systems and cannabinoids, we're kind of used to the fact that a lot of scientific truths are not necessarily comfortable to be discussed or and taken in consideration as the rest of the science. Like I literally remember myself like around 10 years ago at this point when I was a UCD in University College of Dublin in Ireland, and I was working on looking at CBD and terpene receptors, and literally like my colleagues in the same lab, like they would treat me like the second level, like the scientist was not doing anything because it's just interested in pots. And it was like we have a great way to discourage anything that is not mainstream, and usually that's, in my opinion, that's a really good path. Like if you are working on that path, where everyone is so scared about you walking it that they need to start, as Montagnier like showed, be put into a roulotte and not being sponsored and not being funded, and uh, again not being supported in any way for like truth to come out. That's usually a very good indicator that we are working on directions that presumably are really aligning into truths that are uncomfortable. Because then if you apply this type of knowledge to our lives, what that could turn into, which again is conversations that we have very often in terms of economics and how cannabinoids can, lower the costs of medical bills, actually, because they can substitute so many different pharmaceuticals, and potentially, with our nutrition and lifestyle modification in terms of our endocannabinoid system, we truly can start to become like really cost effective in terms of healthcare. Again, like these type of studies observed it from the area that mainly I'm concerned about, so pathophysiology and medicine. Then really they lead us in a space where there is no spending. We are our own healers, or like, our loved ones become our own healers. So that's a tough pill to swallow, I guess.
For the way we've set up our
Yeah,
current world. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And when you were saying that he was the scientist was put in a trailer outside of the university, it just made me think of what you mentioned about the disregard and ignoring it doing more damage than if they would have just gone to him and said, "I disagree with you." So that's
But if you watch the documentary, what they're saying, and again, I found it really cool, is that they are like, yeah, was supposed to be like a, I guess, 200-meter square size of a lab for the amount of people and experiments that we are attempting to run. So, and it was like really small, and they're like, so we're very crowded in here, but we love it because we're creating so many interactions, and we have even more bonded together, and we have much better friendships. So they all kind of seem to like tune in what they were preaching, and it kind of like really had a strong impact in the success actually of their experiments. And again, another interesting thing on when they make the documentary is that the documentary is filmed, and never until that moment they've had cameras inside the trailer. So that in itself, so the observation, and again, I guess this is, we can stop it, and then there's gonna be other 5 different presentation that we could do, but the observation itself, just exactly like we know that this is quantum physics, the observation itself was modifying the experiment. So they had to start, switching off lights, and we was switching off cameras, switching off stuff that was modifying that electromagnetic signals that they wanted to just record naturally, like the song of that DNA, basically. So that was interesting for them as well, because they were like, okay guys, like we are seeing stuff that is different now, so you need to switch off your phone, take out the battery, like we need to reset here.
Fascinating. Very, very, very cool.
Okay, well, I'll just ask maybe everyone that is following us for today to drop us a line of the first 5 things that come to your mind that you are grateful on. For me, it's your presence, this internet connection, and the fact that I can finally go and fill my belly, because I'm feeling a little lightheaded and I'm hungry and I know I have food around. So that's great. And no, thank you, seriously. And thank you for being part now. At this point, we're like going with these lives from quite a few Tuesday. Again, you're seeing this in a later time that it was intended to, and I think it's been a perfect confirmation on how waves that we cannot touch, cannot see, cannot taste, cannot smell, but they have an incredible, profound effect on our lives and pretty much anything we do. And because in this part of the world where I'm working at now, there was no electricity and no landline, no phone line for almost 24 hours, and never experienced something like this. Like I went through some regional blackouts in my life, but never like a full-on like this. And it's very interesting. Like 3, 2, 1, you are in a completely different time and era. You are not participating anymore into this 2025 of you and I, Canada, Spain, like being full touch and like working remotely and all of this. So 3, 2, 1, you are with the things that are at the hand in front of you.
You're forced to be more present and forced to take time off. I remember when we had some massive blackouts here, a lot of people were out in the street just to see what's going on, and then people started talking, hanging out in front of the house, just like really chilling, which is something you don't normally see here. It's just everyone just goes to work and then goes home, and they're indoors and you can't even tell if they're home or not. So there is some beauty to changing how we are connected. Like maybe we're not connected across the ocean anymore, but we become more connected to our surroundings. I'm just glad we have the option.
Yeah, no, totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Alrighty. Well, with that, let's say thank you to everyone, and we'll see everybody next week for yet another session. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Ciao.